the trial that falls apart the moment you check the dates. Imagine standing trial for treason, adultery, and incest, all decided in a single day, with barely 2 weeks between your arrest and your execution. Imagine one of the charges against you involves a specific date, a specific location, a specific act. And imagine that on that exact date, you were actually somewhere else entirely, still recovering from childbirth. A fact that would have been easy for anyone in the room to check, and imagine nobody checks it. Because nobody in that room actually wants an answer. They already have their verdict. That is the trial of Anne Boleyn. And the strange part isn't just that the evidence doesn't hold up, it's that centuries later, almost the exact same pattern shows up again in a different trial. Except that time, a second court actually went back, reopened the case, and formally proved in writing that the original trial had been corrupt from the start. So here's what this video is actually about. Most people, if they know Anne Boleyn at all, know her as the woman who broke up a marriage and lost her head for it. The other woman, who got what was coming to her, or at best a tragic footnote in Henry VIII's story. What most people don't know is who she actually was before any of that. A teenager formed by the most sophisticated royal court in Europe, years ahead of England in culture and religion, arguably the most intellectually developed queen the country had ever had. And what almost nobody talks about is how thin, how rushed, and how geographically impossible the actual evidence against her was. I'll save the second half of this story for the end, because once you hear about a trial 3 centuries later that got formally reopened and overturned, probably fabricated stops being a theory and starts looking like a pattern. Let's start with who Anne Boleyn actually was, because the homewrecker story completely skips over her formative years. Anne wasn't raised at the English court. As a teenager, she was sent abroad, eventually landing in the household of Queen Claude of France. And the French court at that time was, by a wide margin, the most culturally advanced in Europe. Fashion, poetry, music, philosophy, and crucially, early reformist religious thinking all moved through that court years before they reached England in any serious way. Anne spent her most formative years fully immersed in that environment, absorbing continental style and ideas most English nobles wouldn't encounter for another decade. So by the time she returns to England and eventually catches Henry's attention, she isn't some provincial girl who got lucky. She's arguably the most cosmopolitan, most intellectually formed woman in the entire English court, fluent in continental fashion, conversant in reformist religious ideas that were still radical in England, and sophisticated in a way that set her apart from virtually everyone else Henry had ever met. This matters because it reframes the entire relationship. Henry wasn't just infatuated with a pretty face. He was drawn to someone who represented an entirely different, more modern world than the one he'd grown up in. And that same intellectual and religious independence is part of what makes her so useful and so dangerous once the marriage sours. Anne becomes queen in 1533, after years of legal warfare to end Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, and for a while, she's not just consort. She's politically active, engaged with the reformist religious movement gaining ground in England, and by most accounts, genuinely influential in the direction of Henry's break from Rome. This isn't a woman content to sit quietly. She has opinions, she has allies, and she has enemies. A combination that becomes lethal the moment Henry's affection starts to cool. By 1536, that affection has cooled considerably. Anne has failed to produce a surviving son, court politics have shifted against her, and Henry has already turned his attention toward Jane Seymour. And then, with startling speed, everything collapses. Here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. The entire process, from arrest to execution, takes less than 3 weeks. Anne is arrested on the 2nd of May, 1536. She's tried and convicted on the 15th. She's executed on the 19th. Compare that to virtually any other major treason trial of the era, which typically unfolds over months, sometimes years, and the speed alone is a massive red flag by the legal standards of the time, and certainly by any modern standard. The charges against her are almost absurd in scope. Adultery with 5 different men, treasonous conspiracy against the king's life, and this is the one worth sitting with, incest with her own brother, George Boleyn. Let's actually look at the incest charge because it's the clearest example of how fabricated this entire case was. The accusation specifies a particular date and location for the alleged act between Anne and George. And historians who've cross-referenced the court's own records have found something remarkable. On that exact date, Anne was recovering from childbirth in a different location entirely, under circumstances that would have made the accusation physically impossible. This isn't ambiguous. This isn't a case of missing records or contested interpretation. The prosecution's own timeline contradicts itself the moment you check it against dates that were, at the time, a matter of public record. So why does nobody catch this? Because nobody in the room is actually trying to determine the truth. Thomas Cromwell, who orchestrates the case, isn't building a genuine investigation. He's building a fast, legally sufficient justification for a verdict that's already been decided. The men accused alongside Anne, including a court musician named Mark Smeaton, appear to have been pressured or coerced into confessions. The trial itself is conducted by a jury of peers stacked with men who have every incentive to convict, including, in a detail that still unsettles historians, Anne's own uncle presiding as Lord High Steward. This isn't a search for truth. It's a legal formality wrapped around a decision that had already been made before the trial even started. Anne is executed on the 19th of May, 1536, by a swordsman brought over specially from France. Even her execution method was arranged with a strange, almost solicitous efficiency, as if speed and precision were the only things anyone involved still cared about getting right. So that's Anne Boleyn's trial on its own. A case built on impossible timelines, coerced confessions, and a verdict that was clearly decided before the evidence was even presented. Deeply suspicious, almost certainly fabricated, but still, in the strict historical sense, probably. Here's the part I promised you, the part that turns probably into something a court of law actually proved. 3 centuries after Anne's execution, England wasn't the only place a rushed, politically motivated trial destroyed a woman on evidence that didn't hold up. 100 years before Anne was even born in France, a 19-year-old named Joan of Arc was tried by a church court on charges of heresy, convicted, and burned at the stake in 1431. A trial conducted by clergy sympathetic to the English cause during the 100 Years' War, built on coerced testimony and procedural violations from start to finish. For centuries, that might have remained just another probably corrupt trial from a brutal era. Except it didn't stay that way. In 1456, 25 years after Joan's execution, Pope Calixtus III authorized a formal reinvestigation, a nullification trial, that reopened the entire case, interviewed surviving witnesses, examined the original trial records in detail, and formally declared the original verdict null and void, citing fraud and procedural corruption in the original proceedings. This isn't speculation. This is a documented, official, second legal process that examined the first trial and put its corruption in writing, on the record, for history to keep. Put the 2 trials side by side and the point sharpens instead of repeating itself. Anne Boleyn's trial shows you every symptom of a fabricated case, the impossible timeline, the geographically contradictory evidence, the suspiciously fast verdict. And historians are about as confident as they can be, without a formal reversal, that it was corrupt. Joan of Arc's trial shows you what it looks like when a court actually goes back and proves it. Same pattern, same era of history. One case where we're left connecting the dots ourselves, and one case where the dots were connected for us, officially, on paper, 25 years after it was already too late to matter to the person it happened to. So, which is the real story? The queen whose trial falls apart the moment you check the dates, or the teenager whose corrupt trial was formally overturned by the very institution that killed her? Maybe it's both. Maybe the real pattern here is that when power needs a fast verdict, the truth was never really the point. And every so often, history gets a chance to prove that, decades too late to help the person who needed it most. If you want to see what actually happened in the days between Anne's arrest and her execution, because the speed of it gets even stranger once you look hour by hour, there's a video right here that covers it. Go watch that next, and if you're not subscribed yet, hit the button so you don't miss what's coming, and let me know in the comments. Do you think Anne Boleyn's trial should count as one of history's most obvious miscarriages of justice? I'll be reading them.